On November 14th, 2025, a single encrypted file appeared on an anonymous whistleblower site for exactly 43 minutes before it vanished. The file was small, just 23 pages, stamped with the seal of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors and marked Eyes Only Contingency Planning Group. Within those pages was something no American was ever meant to see: a precise month-by-month timeline for the controlled demolition of the United States dollar as the world's reserve currency, a schedule that ends in the winter of 2027 with the words, Phase 5 complete, dollar no longer, required for global settlement. The document wasn't a theory or a forecast. It was a war plan written in the cold, clinical language of central bankers, acknowledging what most politicians still refuse to say out loud. The dollar's reign is ending, and the Federal Reserve itself is quietly preparing the lifeboats while telling the public everything is fine. Tonight, for the first time anywhere, we are going to walk you through that leaked timeline exactly as it was written, step by terrifying step, and show you why millions of people across America and Britain are about to watch their savings, their pensions, and the purchasing power they spent a lifetime building disappear faster than anyone thinks possible. The leak begins with a single sentence that should chill every person watching this. The exorbitant privilege has reached its terminal phase. That phrase, exorbitant privilege, was coined in the 1960s by a French finance minister who was furious that America could borrow endlessly, print endlessly, and force the rest of the planet to pay for its wars and welfare states simply because the dollar was the only currency the world trusted for trade. For 60 years, that privilege let Washington run deficits no other nation could dream of. It let the United States spend $5 trillion on Middle Eastern conflicts, another $8 trillion on pandemic stimulus, and now another $2 trillion on industrial subsidies and tariffs, all while the rest of the world financed the bill by holding dollars they could never spend without America's permission. But the document makes clear that the rest of the world has finally had enough. The Fed's own analysts admit that foreign central banks have been secretly reducing dollar exposure at the fastest pace since the 1971 Nixon shock. China has slashed its treasury holdings by another $280 billion in the last 9 months alone. Saudi Arabia has moved nearly a quarter of its sovereign wealth fund out of dollar assets since the Trump administration threatened to weaponize Bitcoin reserves. Russia has sold every single treasury bond it once owned. Even close allies like Japan and Britain have begun quiet diversification, programs that the public has never been told about, and the Fed knows it. Page 4 of the leak contains a chart labeled Reserve Currency Tipping Point Projection, and the line crosses the point of no return in exactly 26 months from now. What makes this document different from every previous doomsday prediction is that it isn't warning about a collapse. It is orchestrating one. The Federal Reserve has concluded that an uncontrolled, chaotic death of the dollar would destroy America's ability to project power abroad and risk domestic unrest on a scale not seen since the Civil War. So, instead of fighting the inevitable, the contingency group has decided to manage it, to bleed the dollar slowly enough that the American public doesn't notice until it's too late to do anything about it. The timeline is broken into 5 phases, each more shocking than the last, and each designed to look like something else entirely. A policy mistake, a foreign aggression, unnecessary reform, anything but the deliberate dismantling of the currency you are holding in your wallet right now. Phase 1 began in March 2025, 3 months after Donald Trump's second inauguration. The leaked minutes record a closed-door agreement between the Treasury, the Fed, and the largest Wall Street banks to begin gradual yield suppression on the long end of the Treasury curve. In plain language, they decided to keep interest rates artificially low, no matter how much new debt the government issued. Because if rates were allowed to rise naturally to reflect the risk of $20 trillion deficits, the dollar would crash immediately. To pull this off, they needed foreign buyers to keep purchasing Treasuries, even though everyone could see the math, no longer worked. The solution was elegant and ruthless, threaten any country that tried to sell. The document lists quiet warnings delivered to Japan, South Korea and Taiwan. That's significant. Treasury sales would be treated as economic warfare and met with immediate trade sanctions. At the same time, the Fed restarted a stealth version of quantitative easing, buying bonds through offshore proxies in Belgium and the Cayman Islands so the public numbers would never show it. By the end of Phase 1, foreign ownership of US debt had fallen below 50% for the first time since 1970. But the bond market still hadn't cracked because the world was terrified of the consequences of calling America's bluff. Phase 2, which we are living through right now in the final weeks of 2025, is called controlled inflation export. The Fed's own modeling shows that domestic price increases of 15 to 20% per year are now required just to service the national debt without technically defaulting. But politicians cannot survive openly admitting that, so the plan is to push the inflation onto everyone else. The mechanism is simple. Flood the world with newly printed dollars through endless deficit spending. Force foreign nations to absorb those dollars in their reserves and watch their own currencies collapse instead of the dollar. The document actually uses the phrase inflate abroad first. That is why eggs and petrol and rent are soaring in Britain and across Europe, even though their own central banks are raising rates. Those dollars have to go somewhere, and right now they are destroying every currency that still ties its fate to the dollar. The Bank of England knows it. The European Central Bank knows it. But they are trapped. If they break the peg and let their currencies rocket higher, their export industries die overnight. So they beg their populations to endure pain today for stability tomorrow, while the Fed's secret timeline shows there will be no stability tomorrow. Phase 3 begins in the spring of 2026 and is marked on the calendar with a single red circle. BRICS payment system launch. The leaked briefing notes that China, Russia, India, and the new BRICS members will activate a blockchain-based trade settlement platform that settles oil, grain, metals, and semiconductors in a basket of their own currencies plus gold and Bitcoin. The moment that system goes live, any country using it no longer needs dollars to buy energy or food. The document estimates that within 12 months, 35% of global trade will migrate off the dollar system, the same percentage that shifted off the pound sterling in the 15 years after World War I. The Fed's analysts predict an immediate 25% drop in dollar demand, which would normally trigger a currency crisis. But the plan is to preempt it with something far more dramatic. That something is Phase 4, scheduled for autumn 2026, and labeled in the document only as Modern Debt Jubilee. The Federal Reserve intends to announce a one-time American Prosperity Reset, a program that will cancel or convert roughly $7 trillion of household debt, mortgages, student loans, credit cards, auto loans, all of it. On paper, it will be sold as the greatest act of middle-class relief in history, the fulfillment of decades of populist promises from both left and right. In reality, it is the nuclear option for the dollar. The moment the announcement is made, foreign creditors will realize that America has chosen domestic political survival over repaying its international obligations. The Treasury will offer to roll all foreign-held debt into century bonds paying less than 1% interest, essentially a polite default. The document predicts that most countries will refuse and begin dumping dollar assets en masse. The Fed's own projection shows the dollar losing another 40% of its value in the 6 months that follow, pushing imported inflation in the United States past 30% annually. Supermarket shelves will look like Venezuela within weeks, but the timeline coldly notes that domestic unrest will be mitigated by debt cancellation optics and emergency price subsidies funded by final round money creation. And then we arrive at Phase 5, the winter of 2027, the endgame. By this point, the dollar will have ceased to function as a global reserve asset. The Fed plans to introduce a new digital dollar, fully controlled, fully trackable, issued directly by the central bank with no commercial banks in between. The leaked memo describes it as the necessary evolution of money for a post-hegemony environment. Every American will be required to convert their remaining cash and bank balances into the new currency at a fixed rate that will be announced only after conversion is mandatory. The document is explicit that this final step must happen quickly, within a single banking holiday weekend, because once people understand they are being forced into a currency that can be frozen, inflated, or confiscated at will, they will try to escape into gold, Bitcoin, or anything else they can carry. That is why military contingency plans are referenced in the appendix, with National Guard units pre-positioned around major Federal Reserve branches and data centers. The last sentence of the timeline is only 7 words long. Phase 5, complete dollar, no longer required. What you have just heard is not a conspiracy theory. It is not a prediction pulled from the fever dreams of internet commentators. It is the Federal Reserve's own contingency plan for a future it believes is inevitable, written by the same institution that promised you in 2021 that inflation was transitory, in 2008 that subprime was contained, in 1971 that closing the gold window was only temporary. Every time the dollar has faced an existential threat, the American people have been told everything is under control right up until the moment it wasn't. This time the difference is that the people in the war room have stopped pretending they can save the system they spent 80 years building. They are preparing to manage its funeral and to make sure they and the institutions they serve emerge on the other side with their power intact while everyone else wakes up to discover that the money they thought was theirs has become something else entirely. The whistleblower who leaked this document ended their message with a simple warning. They think you will thank them for the reset because you will no longer have debt. They are counting on you not noticing what they took in its place. Whether that future arrives exactly as written in 2027 or a year earlier, or later no longer matters. The countdown has already begun, and the choices you make with what you own, what you earn, and what you trust in the months ahead will determine whether you watch this collapse from the lifeboats or whether you are left standing on the deck waving goodbye to a century of promises that were never meant to be kept. The dollar's final chapter is being written right now, not in Washington or Beijing, but in the decisions of millions of ordinary people who are only just beginning to understand that the world they were born into is quietly coming to an end.